Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar on leaving no one behind, persons with disabilities, and addressing inequalities in our cities and communities. My name is Emson Sibanda, and I'm the Chief of National Strategies and Capacity Building Branch, Vision for Sustainable Development Goals in UNDESA. Today's webinar is organized by UNDESA's Division for Sustainable Development Goals and its Office for Sustainable Development in partnership with the Division for Inclusive Social Development. The webinar is part of the 4th edition of United Cities for All 2020, marking the celebration of the World Cities Day 2020, and taking a focus on leaving no one behind, persons with disabilities and inequalities in our cities and communities. The webinar is also part of a series of online webinars exploring specific sessions under the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development's 2020 International Mayors Forum. But before we begin, I would like to remind you to keep your microphone and camera deactivated at all times. Please use the chat box for questions and sharing material. As your moderator, I will select questions from the chat box. I might also invite some participants to take the floor to pose questions. Please do not try to take the floor unless you are invited by the moderator. If you are given the floor, please unmute yourself and indicate your name, your organization, country before your question. The webinar, I think, will be recorded, and the recording will be made public after the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, member states of the United Nations pledged to leave no one behind, including persons with disabilities. Disability inclusion is an essential condition to upholding human rights, sustainable development, and peace and security. In that regard, disability inclusion is also central to the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to leave no one behind and to reaching the furthest behind first. The commitment to realizing the rights of persons with disabilities is not only a matter of justice, it is an investment in our common future. However, persons with disabilities continue to be among those who are most excluded, including in gaining access to full employment and decent work, quality education and health services, social protection, adequate and affordable housing, transport, green and public spaces, and in participating in political decision-making. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened their predicament, with many of them falling into poverty. As highlighted in the Secretary General's policy brief on a disability-inclusive response to COVID-19 that was issued this past summer, persons with disabilities are among the hardest hit by the pandemic and experience higher rates of infection and death. The socio-economic and humanitarian repercussions of the pandemic are deepening pre-existing inequalities associated with disability and threatening to further exacerbate them. Therefore, this webinar is very timely. It gives us an opportunity to learn how cities, towns, and local authorities have been designing and implementing disability-inclusive response and recovery measures to contribute to the development of more inclusive and accessible societies in consultations with persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. To kickstart our discussions, we have a video message from Mr. Park, who is the new head of the UN Office for Sustainable Development in South Korea. We will then hear from Ms. Daniela Bass, Director, Division for Inclusive Social Development, Mr. Victor Kalisi, Commissioner, Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, City of New York, Dr. Daisy Ustra, President, World Family Organization, and then we'll have another short video from the state of Tamil Nadu in India, followed by Mr. Jonitom of our guests, the State Commissioner for Persons with Disability in the state of Tamil Nadu, India. And lastly, by Mr. Murali Padmanabhan, who is the Disability Inclusion Advisor for Life for the World. With this in mind, let me introduce our panelists. Ms. Daniela Bass is the Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. She's a political scientist with a major in international politics, also a certified journalist and multicultural life coach. Prior to joining the United Nations, Ms. Bass held managerial roles in the private sector in Italy and was inter alia advisor for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for the presidency of the Council of Ministers, as well as special advisor to the Vice President of the European Commission on Human Rights, Democracy and Social Affairs. Mr. Victor Kalisi, Commissioner, Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities in New York City. As Commissioner, Mr. Kalisi has been an advocate for people with disabilities in both the Bloomberg and de Blasio administrations, responsible for ensuring that New York City is the most accessible city in the world. He advises the mayor and agency partners on accessibility issues, spearheads public-private partnerships, and chairs the Accessibility Committee of the city's building code. Prior to working in New York City government, he was a disability advocate in the non-profit sector. Dr. Daisy Ustra is the president of the World Family Organization. Since assuming this position in 1997, she represents the organization at the United Nations, governments and intergovernmental organizations level. She directs the work of the organization through its regional structures and national committees, and assists governments in preparing strategic frameworks and plans of action to implement family-focused policies, programs, and projects, and services at national, regional, and local levels, especially in health, education, housing, social protection, family mediation, microcredit, and others. Dr. Ustra has worked in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and is currently based in South America. And we have Mr. Murali Padmanabhan, who is a development professional with 24 years of experience and exposure in the field of gender, children, disability, and inclusive development. He is trained in gender and disability and inclusive development, human rights, law, social justice and development law, and inclusive project cycle management. His experience in working with persons with disabilities and other marginalized stakeholders ranges from grassroots to the international level. He promotes empowerment, equality, and mainstreaming through inclusive and participatory program development, policy influence, and advocacy. He is currently the Gender and Disability Inclusion Advisor for the South and Central Asia region at the Disability Inclusion Lab, Light of the World. And lastly, we have the Director of the UNOSD office, Mr. Park, who just assumed his responsibilities this month. Before that, he served at the government for almost 30 years, mainly at the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Korea, where he joined in 1991, starting at mid-level management, rising to the rank of the Vice Minister of Environment. Throughout the experience, he has built various capacities and broadened the scope of work by engaging in many different areas of sustainable development. With those few remarks, I think we can start with the short video from Mr. Park.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and colleagues, my name is Chung-Gyu Park, Head of Office, United Nations Office for Sustainable Development in Incheon, Republic Korea. Welcome and thank you all for joining this International Mayors Forum preparatory webinar focusing on leaving no one behind persons with disabilities and addressing inequality in our cities and communities, which we are co-organizing with the UNDESA Division for Inclusive Social Development and the Division for Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to especially thank our distinguished speakers, Ms. Daniela Bass, Director of the UNDESA Division for Inclusive Social Development, co-organizer of this meeting, who will also deliver her opening remarks. Mr. Victor Kalisi, Commissioner, Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, City of New York, USA, Dr. Daisy Ustra, President, World Family Organization, Mr. Johnny Tom Banis, State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, State of Tamil Nadu, India, Mr. Murai Padmanabhan, Disability Inclusion Advisor, Right for the World. I would also like to thank our moderator, Dr. M. Vivanda, Chief of the National Strategies and Capacity Building Branch, UNDESA, Division for Sustainable Development Goals, of which UNOSD is an integral part. This webinar is part of a series our office UNOSD is organized on the topics of the International Based Forum planned in November this year. Through this webinar series, we aim to learn about the challenges that local governments are facing, as well as potential solutions for rapid and sustainable recovery from COVID-19 as we prepare for the International Based Forum. In September 2019, during the UN Secretary General SDG Summit, as our state audit on a political declaration adopted by the UN General Assembly, called for accelerated progress on the SDGs and committed to leaving no one behind. The political declaration further stressed the need to place a focus on the poorest and the most vulnerable in our policies and actions, while fostering local action to accelerate implementation. The political declaration also committed us to empower and support the cities, local authorities, and communities in pushing the 2030 agenda. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated inequalities and vulnerabilities and affected the capacity of local government to deliver public service and to ensure that the basic needs of people living in hardship are met. As a result, many local initiatives, plans, and programs meant to provide equal access to technology, education, livelihoods, and service, focusing on the most vulnerable social groups were put on hold, impacting the gains for many of the SDGs, as well as our common commitment to leave no one behind. The UN World Social Report 2020, which was published by our colleagues of the UNDESA Division for Inclusive Social Development earlier this year, highlights that even before being hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, our world faced historically high levels of inequality. Persons with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to rising inequality and poverty. It's worth noting that of the nearly 1 billion persons with disabilities, an estimated 80% live in cities across developing countries offering poverty. Persons with disabilities are among the poorest, most vulnerable in our cities and communities today. While obstacles exist to achieve the SDGs for persons with disabilities, local governments and actors are key in enabling this progress. Scaling of the inclusion of and accessibility of persons with disabilities across the cities and communities today is an imperative to leave no one behind. This webinar will examine current trends, responses, and lessons to accelerate SDG progress for citizens living with disabilities and make inclusion and empowerment a reality for all. Before concluding, I would like to thank again our partners, the UNDESA Division for Inclusive Social Development and Division for Sustainable Development Goals, as well as distinguished speakers, and all the participants. I invite you all to follow UNOSD future activities, particularly around the sustainable cities and communities, such as the International Mayors Forum later this fall. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Park, for those opening remarks. Now I invite Ms. Daniela Bass to make an intervention. Ms. Bass, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I was concerned there is so much to be said, and thank you very much for inviting me here. Although I have to say that Mr. Park and you, Amson, allow me to call you Amson. We have known each other for quite a while. We're very good colleagues. Actually, all divisions in DESA are working very closely together. So we're much more than honored to be part of this major effort that you have done, and we have joined gladly. Most of the things that are really key have already been mentioned, but allow me to add something more. So, excellencies and distinguished delegates, it's really a great honor for me to have the opportunity to discuss these ongoing efforts to realize inclusive, accessible, affordable, sustainable cities in these very challenging periods. So I would like to structure my intervention in 3 points. The first one is about, as it has already been mentioned earlier by my colleagues, the COVID crisis and how it impacts cities and communities, and it widens inequalities with focus on persons with disabilities. The second point is about the 2030 Agenda and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the third one is how to build back better post-pandemic. So before I start, just to make clear, when we talk about persons with disabilities, and we mention this number, which is approximately 1 billion persons with a disability out of the 7-8 billion people who are living in our planet, we have to think about something else. There are more and more natural disasters and more human-made disasters, and I'm talking about the impacts of climate change and hurricanes, and or if I think of other kind of disasters made by human beings, for instance, wars. So all of this actually causes daily people to acquire new disabilities. And they may be temporary, and most of the times these disabilities become permanent. And I'm also thinking about the demographic changes. The population is changing in terms of age. Our population is becoming more and more older and older. So that also implies that the number of persons with disabling conditions or disabilities is increasing. And all of these generations are in the family, by the way. So let's try to think about the topic we are discussing today in these terms that are just wider than the 1 billion persons with disabilities that usually are thought as the typical stereotype, if you allow me, a person who uses a wheelchair, or a person who is visually or hearing impaired, who might have some invisible disabilities or some cognitive, differences, and so on and so forth. And I'm saying that not only as a professional, but also as a person who has a disability herself. I have been using a wheelchair since I was 6 years old. So I really look at it wearing 2 or 3 different hats. So thank you very much for inviting me. Now, when it comes to COVID-19 and the crisis it is causing and persons with disabilities, indeed, it's impacting societies at their very core and is deepening pre-existing inequalities. So, even under normal circumstances, these 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide were less likely and are less likely to have access to education, healthcare, livelihood, leisure and fun as well, and traveling and sport. So it's very difficult for many of these persons with a disability, depending also on the severity and the level of disability, of course, to participate and be included in the community, a situation which is really further exacerbated for those living in already fragile contexts. And they are more likely, as already said, to live in poverty and experience higher rates of violence and neglect and abuse. So the pandemic is intensifying these inequalities and producing newest threats. So persons with disabilities are really disproportionately affected by health, social, economic impacts of COVID-19. And allow me also to add environments. Environments are not just nature as we think of or so, but it's the family environment, the working environment, the educational environment, the transportation environment, and so on and so forth. So all of this has been outlined in the report of the Secretary General and in his policy brief, as it has already been mentioned, on disability inclusive response to COVID-19. And so, you know, when it comes to COVID-19, it impacts everyone. And unfortunately, in severe cases, it brings death. In care homes, for example, where older people with disabilities are overrepresented, and it ranges up to 19% to an astonishing 72%. And even now, as we face an uncertain future with COVID-19 resurgence, we must uphold the goals of the 2030 Agenda, leaving no one behind. Realizing the rise of persons with disabilities is really central to the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Again, to leave no one behind and continuing to achieve transformative and lasting change on disability inclusion through the UN Disability Inclusive Strategy, which is a priority of the United Nations now more than ever. And so we do hope that this becomes also a priority of mayors in their own communities. Persons with disabilities, particularly women and girls, I have to say, face a great risk of domestic violence with a surge during the pandemic that we have noticed. Schools closures are negatively impacting also women and girls with disabilities who are taking on more chores at home with a stronger responsibility, to take care of the house and whatever, and dropping out permanently their studies. So again, back to inequalities and poverty, the vicious circle of poverty. And this is especially true for those girls who are already living in poverty or in isolated locations, for instance. So what we can do? Well, we have to transform inequalities into a new inclusive care economy where needed that works to continue to a basis for inclusive and accessible cities. The second point, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So there has been progress. Despite the progress, though, made in recent years, persons with disabilities continue to face numerous barriers to their full inclusion and participation in the life of their communities, and it is shed light on the disproportionate level of poverty. Lack, I repeat, to access to education, it lacks. Health services and employment, underrepresentation in decision-making and political participation. Why? Well, because the main barriers to inclusion in cities and communities and urban areas entail not only discrimination and stigma due to prejudices, and sometimes, media has to change its way of portraying persons with disabilities, but there is indeed a lack of accessibility, both physical and to virtual environments. Technology was mentioned. Are we sure that, ICT and all the technological devices that we offer and have and the platforms and so on are accessible to persons who might have sensory disabilities? Are accessible to older people with some disabling conditions? So We need to provide services and rehabilitation where needed. And the lack of support for independent living are critical to the full participation of all persons with disabilities, particularly, allow me to say, to women and girls with disabilities. And we need to monitor and evaluate the implementation of SDG 11, the one we're discussing today, cities and communities. We have to make sure that we adopt the 2030 agenda and we invest in future sustainable urbanization, including the adoption and implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These two things go hand in hand. So the conclusion of persons with disabilities in the 2030 agenda, well, it is so aligned with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it incorporates the disability perspective in all aspects of its realization, monitoring, and evaluation, that we cannot forget about it. The third point, building back better, and the next steps for inclusive, accessible, and sustainable cities in a post-COVID-19 world. And I keep also adding affordable. Things have to be affordable, be that it is technology, transportation, education, and so on, healthcare. So in the series of policy briefs, we said that the Secretary General of the United Nations prepared also and published also a policy brief on COVID-19 and persons with disabilities. So not everyone might have had the possibility to read it. I would like, therefore, to highlight the key points of that policy brief. Promoting educational accessibility and leaving no child behind. This is one of the points of the Secretary General in the policy brief. Strengthening national legislation and policies on healthcare in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Identifying and eliminating obstacles and barriers to accessibility in healthcare facilities. Training healthcare personnel on disability inclusion and improve service delivery for persons with disabilities and COVID-19 testing. Improving research and data, so important, to monitor, evaluate, and strengthen health systems to obtain the scope of the impact of COVID-19, and the one it has on communities where there are persons with disabilities. Address discrimination and exclusion. It's so important, particularly about girls and women with disabilities. Ensure full accessibility to schools. Education is a tool that we're giving in the luggage of young people who start their journey of life. Healthcare and services, the workplace, leisure, recreational activities, sport, all areas of life that are so key before, after, during, and after this pandemic. And redesign, please redesign transportation, infrastructures, and information and communication technologies to make our cities, our rural areas, our communities, our societies inclusive of all people, including those who have a disability. And most importantly, change the mindset, change the laws and the policies to ensure that the rights, the opportunities, and the dignity for persons with disabilities and those they live with around the world play a role for us to be equalizers to reduce inequalities. So I could say, as I said, lots more, but I would like to conclude my intervention by saying that persons with disabilities and their situation should be positioned at the center of COVID-19 responses and recovery to build back better. Remember, many people who recover from COVID-19 have also then other underlying health situations that can cause disabilities or can become disabling. So let's take this opportunity. Let's emphasize that this is a great platform to strengthen awareness among governments, the United Nations system, academic institutions, the civil society organizations, the private sector, leading to specific actions and results in making cities inclusive, accessible, affordable, and sustainable for all. And if we want to carry on this conversation within UNDESA, we would like you to invite also to follow the works of the Commission for Social Development next February, and the focus is on digital technologies and social development. So we could bring it there and carry on the conversation. Thank you so much, Anson. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Bass, for those wonderful remarks. And I think you managed to highlight three aspects. How do we ensure that any post-COVID recovery places people with disability at the center? I think that's a very critical issue that we need to push for. And of course, I think linking the CRPD and the 23rd agenda, it's a wonderful piece of information that we sometimes tend to forget, that the CRPD laid the groundwork. And of course, the Building Back Better issue, I think it's something that we need to focus on. In particular, how do we ensure that services, are affordable and accessible for persons with disabilities, especially in the current context where people are working from home or kids are learning from home. So access to technologies, closing the digital divide will be very, very critical. But as you rightly say, changing the mindset and laws, I think will be critical as well. Now I invite Mr. Victor Kalisi. Mr. Kalisi, you have 10 minutes. We cannot hear the audio. There's no audio.
Hello, my name is Victor Kalisi, Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. And at my office, we work to ensure that everything the city offers is accessible to people with disabilities. This includes housing, transportation, benefits, employment, and many other things that make our city such an incredible and unique place to live and visit. Broadway shows, our beautiful art and cultural institutions, our vast park system, and many other things. However, our responsibility to the disability community does not stop when an emergency strikes. Over the last several months, our city and the world has been heavily impacted by COVID-19. Our office has done everything that we could to ensure that the disability community was included in the city's emergency response. We worked with our communications department to ensure that the mayor's daily press briefings have American Sign Language interpretation and captioning. In addition, we work side by side with our web teams to ensure all of our health information going out was visually and digitally accessible. We assembled a coalition of disability service providers and advocacy organizations that met on a weekly basis to discuss the COVID-19 response and resources. Every Friday, we would share the latest updates from our city partners and then hear from the community on what they needed and how the city could adjust their approach to be more inclusive. While all of this was going on, we were forced to adapt to our new digital way of life. Through extensive testing and troubleshooting, we created an accessible virtual meeting guide that explained how to create an accessible virtual meeting space for people with disabilities. Then we put it into action by moving our entire month-long celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act online. All month long, we had over 30 events in 30 days that celebrated the art, history, and culture of the disability community within the United States. Now, as countries across the globe are faced with the many challenges of reopening, there are issues arising for the disability community that we still need to plan for. First, as many resources and services moved online, it became quickly apparent that not everyone has equal access to the internet. We call it the digital divide. These virtual meetings and celebrations that people have been having were revolutionary to many people with disabilities, but due to lack of access to technology, some people were left behind. This is an issue of poverty, compounded by staggering unemployment numbers. There is still a lot of work to be done to promote the employment of job seekers with disabilities. This past October marked the 75th anniversary of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or NDEM. NDEM is a celebration of American workers with disabilities and a reminder of the importance of inclusive hiring practices. In celebration, the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, MOPD, helped to arrange virtual events and activities centered on the theme, increasing access and opportunity. Over the past month, MOPD held business-led workshops and panel discussions that focused on reasonable accommodations and disclosure, accessible hiring practices, securing remote work, and the new job landscape post-COVID-19. All of this program was put together by our NYC at Work employment program for New Yorkers with disabilities. NYC at Work is the first public-private partnership that connects New Yorkers with disabilities to meaningful living wage jobs. NYC at Work provides professional development opportunities, skills, workshops, and more that help people with disabilities in their journey to employment. Our office has created Empowered NYC, free, trustworthy financial counseling for people with disabilities. Empowered NYC is an initiative to help New York City residents with disabilities and their families take control of their finances and become more financially stable. For many individuals with disabilities that are receiving benefits, there is a fear of entering or re-entering the workforce because they may lose their benefits. Empowered NYC helps navigate the complex field of transitioning to work and provides them with an opportunity to plan for their financial future. With all of these resources and programs, MOPD is working hard to provide people with disabilities the information that they need to gain financial independence. With more people with disabilities in the workplace, there is a louder voice in the room ensuring that products and services are accessible for the disability community. As we continue to move the needle on the reducing the unemployment rate of people with disabilities, we are also reinforcing the creation of a more accessible future where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Kalisi with the New York City. I think he did highlight some important issues. Definitely one of the big ones is the fear of persons with disabilities losing any benefits that they might have as they transition back into the workforce. I think we need to think about how we can ensure that those benefits are protected. So maybe having a more robust social protection system will be one way, I think, to really protect those benefits and ensure that persons with disabilities are not plunged into poverty. And of course, he also mentioned the issue of the digital divide and how New York City is trying to close that gap. And of course, the importance of promoting or establishing public-private partnerships. In this case, with what they created with New York City at Work. I think it is a good example of how public-private partnerships can also help in to support the persons with disabilities. Our next speaker is Dr. Daisy Ustra. Dr. Ustra, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to thank the division, the DESA, for inviting me to be the speaker. in this so important webinar that is preparatory to the Mayor's Forum and also the United Cities for All, a very important organization also to get families, cities that are made to each other to profit for all what our countries in the federal level, in the national level, agree. And we know that sometimes it doesn't get to the local level where the actions and the results are being executed. This webinar and the theme, Leaving No One Behind, and persons with a disability and addressing inequalities in our cities and communities. It's a theme that we are trying to focus since the year 2000 in the first Forum for for Social Development that was held in South Africa. People with a disability have been left behind for many, many years. And the Convention for the Persons with Disability have improved a lot. But still we feel that people with a disability in cities, in communities, are far left behind. I want to point that when we started to talk about the local level, when we started to include in our discussions that we need to reflect in the world that we want to build, the future that we want, we realize that more and more the local level, the communities and cities, and with that the families, they have to be included. So I would like to point that this is the first thing we have to think about. We have to include and take the inequalities of cities, communities, in order to be included in all programs at national level and international level as well. I would like, as a doctor, to bring to your attention another burden bringing to people with disabilities with the COVID-19. We know already that this 1 billion people living in our planet with disability, they are lacking of a lot of services in the inclusion for health, for education, for opportunities, for equality, for bring together families and people with disability among the family, inside the family, to have the same rights. This moment, we are discovering that with COVID-19, a disease that is not completely known yet, another burden are bringing to people without disabilities. But as a consequence of the COVID infection, the disability. We are learning that many people have been now with the consequence of the infection, they cannot walk, they cannot move their arms, they cannot move sometimes just the legs. So new disease that we have to bring about the discussion and the burden that the people without disability and with the organization working with people with disability to this near future. As I said in the beginning, families and cities, local communities, they are made to each other. I cannot see that we can build the future that we want, leaving no one behind, unless the big highlight to all international organizations, to all international multilateral institutions, to all national institutions, the government, put a new light on the local authorities in the local level, in the cities, in the communities, focusing the family. All the services that we are talking 20 years about that we need to bring to the local level, they are not yet still implemented. I wish that this Forum, International Mayors Forum, and of course the all international, the Cities for All, that it's a very important organization that actually the World Family Organization would like to connect a little bit more to join our work. We will really have the strength to put people with disabilities, without any lack, any reason to be left behind, and included to that the new burden that COVID-19 is bringing to people healthy that will become people with disability. I thank you very much for inviting me for that, and I hope that this series will continue and the local level, cities, communities, and families will hold together to build the future that we want, leaving no one, no family, no city, no community behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daisy. I think you do highlight a very important element, which is that with the COVID infections, we are learning more each day that people who get infected also develop new forms of disabilities that we never thought about, as many of them are not recovering. So I think this is an important issue. Definitely, as Ms. Bass said, we have man-made disasters and natural-made disasters that also increase the numbers of persons with disabilities. And definitely COVID will also increase those numbers. And of course, you do highlight the importance of ensuring that we put families at the center of our activities. Communities and local authorities need really to focus on families and their role in implementing all our development goals. With those remarks, thank you very much. And now I tend to invite Mr. Johnny Tom Varghese to make his presentation. Mr. Varghese, you have 10 minutes.
We have a short video before his presentation.
I thought we could play the video last, unless if you want to play it now, that's fine.
Has imposed a partial lockdown on Italy has nearly 12,000 The nationwide lockdown in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak disrupted normal life across the country. The anxiety brought by the lockdown announcement was beyond measure for the differently abled individuals who need support and assistance from other people. But soon, their despair turned into hope when the government of Tamil Nadu stepped in to help them in every possible way in association with district administrations, NGOs, and other stakeholders. Department for the Welfare of Differently Abled Persons, Tamil Nadu, has set up a 24-hour helpline center to reach out to the persons with disabilities in urban and rural areas. The differently abled persons can place a call to the toll-free number 1800-425-0111 and get their essentials delivered in real time. Experts well-versed in sign language help the hearing and speech-impaired persons through WhatsApp video calls. After receiving the call, the district office will be alerted to arrange the relief material and get it delivered to the persons with disability. Later on, the call center executive will call up the beneficiary and verify if the delivery has been carried out successfully. So far, over 68,000 families of disabled persons have benefited through the helpline facility. Tamil Nadu government issues a maintenance allowance of Rs 1,500 each month to differently abled individuals. Considering the lockdown situation, 2 months of maintenance allowance of Rs 3,000 has already been deposited in advance into their account.
Akash, தங்கப்ல பாக்குறியாங்க? சமத்தா இருக்கணும். வணக்கம், என்னோட பேர் சித்ரா, என் பையனோட பேரு ஜெய் ஆகாஷ். இவர் மூளை முடக்குவாதத்தால பாதிக்கப்பட்டவர். இந்த லாக்டவுன் பீரியட்ல மாவட்ட மாற்றுத்திறனாளிகள் நல அலுவலகத்திலிருந்து எங்களுக்கு மாதந்தோறும் பராமரிப்பு உதவித்தொகையாக 1500 ரூபாய் வழங்கிட்டு வந்தாங்க. இப்ப ஹை நீட் சப்போர்ட் திட்டத்தின் கீழ் 2500 ரூபாய் கொடுத்திருக்காங்க. அதையும் இந்த ஊரடங்கு காலத்துல 2 மாசத்துக்கு சேர்த்து முன்பணமாவே கொடுத்துட்டாங்க. அது எங்களுக்கு இன்னும் பெரிய பெரிய உதவியா இருக்கு. சூப்பரா இருக்கு அலங்காரத்துக்கு. ஏண்டி பால், பிஸ்கட், எங்களுக்கு அரிசி, பருப்பு இது போன்ற பொருட்கள் வாங்க மிகவும் உதவியா இருந்துச்சு. இது மட்டும் இல்லாம எங்களுக்கு ஒரு மோட்டர் பொருந்திய தையல் இயந்திரம் கொடுத்திருக்காங்க. இந்த ஊரடங்கு காலத்துல என்னால முடிஞ்ச அளவுக்கு மாஸ்க், பிளவுஸ் இது போன்ற துணிகள் தைத்து என்னோட வருமானத்தை பெருக்கிக்கிட்டேன். இந்த உதவிகளை செய்த தமிழக அரசுக்கும் மாவட்ட மாற்றுத்திறனாளிகள் நல அலுவலகத்திற்கும் எங்களுக்கு நன்றியை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறோம்.
Understanding their difficulties during this pandemic, the government of Tamil Nadu has recently announced 1,000 rupees cash assistance to persons with disabilities. The officers of the differently abled welfare department carried out door-to-door cash distribution and issued the relief personally to them. Differently abled government employees have been exempted from attending essential services and work. An order has been passed for a separate queue in ration shops for the persons with disabilities.
ரேஷன் கடையில முன்னால போனா கூட்டமா இருக்குங்க. இப்போ தனியார்களுக்கு மாற்றுத்திறனாளியாக வரிசையாக விட்டு பொருள்கள்லாம் வழங்கினாங்க. இந்த ஊரடங்கு காலத்தினால எங்களுக்கு பருப்பு, அரிசி எல்லாம் வீட்டுக்கே தேடி கொடுத்தாங்க.
To ensure that no one is starving, food packets have been distributed. Availability of adequate nutrition is ensured for disabled children by issuing Arvin Nutrition Package. Children with autism and neurological disorders requiring special training and playing. During this lockdown, Tamil Nadu government has arranged sensory therapy materials to be delivered at their home, which eliminates the need for going to the daycare center.
வணக்கம், என் பொண்ணு பேர் கனிஷ்கா. இவங்க மனநல வளர்ச்சி கொஞ்சம் கம்மியா இருக்காங்க. என் ஹஸ்பண்ட் இறந்துட்டாங்க. இவங்க ஆர்டிசம் கிளாஸ்க்கு போயிட்டு இருக்காங்க. அது இந்த லாக்டவுன் நேரத்துல எனக்கு ரொம்ப கஷ்டமாயிடுச்சு. என்னால கிளாஸுக்கு கூட்டு போக முடியல. தமிழக அரசு மாற்றுத்திறனாளி நலத்துறையில கிட்டு கொடுத்திருக்காங்க. அது என் பொண்ணுக்கு ரொம்ப யூஸ்ஃபுல்லா இருக்கு. இப்ப லாக்டவுன் நேரத்துல ஸ்கூலுக்கும் போக முடியாது அப்படிங்கிறப்போ அங்க இருந்தே கிளாஸ் இங்க வீட்டுல நடத்துறது எனக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா இருக்கு. இந்த கிளாஸ் என் பொண்ணுக்கு ரொம்ப யூஸ்ஃபுல்லா இருக்கு. அது அவங்க மனநிலை சீரா இருக்காங்க. குழந்தை நல்லா இம்ப்ரூவ் ஆயிருக்காங்க. என்கிட்ட நல்லா சந்தோஷமா பேசுறாங்க, சாப்பிடுறாங்க, நல்லா விளையாடுறாங்க. என் பொண்ணு ரொம்ப டிப்ரெஷனா இருந்தாங்க இந்த லாக்டவுன் நேரத்துல 2 மாசமா. இப்ப கொஞ்சம் ஃப்ரீயா இருக்காங்க. அவங்க டீச்சர் நடத்துறதை பார்த்து ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா இருக்கு. என் பொண்ணு சந்தோஷமா இருக்கலாம், நான் ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா இருக்கேன். ஏன்னா என் குழந்தை என் உலகமே.
Vehicles with therapy units have been arranged to reach out to children living in remote villages to offer therapeutic services.
மாவட்ட மாற்றுத்திறனாளிகள் நல அலுவலகத்தின் மூலமாக மொபைல் தெரப்பி யூனிட் மாவட்டம் முழுவதும் செயல்படுறாங்க. இந்த யூனிட் பாத்தீங்கன்னா இந்த லாக்டவுன் பீரியட்ல கிராமப்புறங்கள்ல இருக்கிற குழந்தைகளுக்கு, அதாவது மூளை முடக்குவாத குழந்தை, மன உணர்ச்சி குன்றிய குழந்தை, தசைப்பயிற்சியால் பாதிக்கப்பட்ட குழந்தைகளுக்கு வீடுகளுக்கே சென்று பிசியோதெரபி ட்ரீட்மெண்ட் அவங்களுக்கு வழங்குறோம். கை கால் நல்லா அவங்க பயிற்சிகள் கொடுத்து அந்த நடக்க முடியாத குழந்தைக்கு நம்ம தெரபிஸ்ட் நல்லா நடக்க வச்சிருக்காங்க.
ஹாய் தர்னேஷ், இது என்ன? ஆப்பிள். பனானா.
Children with special needs receive on-call therapeutic services by highly equipped speech therapists.
சார், இந்த ஊரடங்கு சமயத்துல என் பையனுக்கு ஆன்லைன் கிளாஸ் எடுத்ததுக்கு ரொம்ப நன்றி சார்.
இந்த பையன்
ஓகே சார்.
ஓகே, பை தர்னேஷ்.
For crawling, differently abled persons require protective kits which includes cotton gloves, kneecap and socks to lead a better life.
தமிழ்நாடு அரசு வீட்டுக்கு சாக்ஸு, கால் சட்டை, கை க்ளோஸு இதெல்லாம் கொடுத்தாங்க. ரொம்ப நன்றி.
Personal protective kits such as masks, gloves, soaps, etc. have been distributed to persons with disabilities. They can avail protective kits from the comforts of their home by calling the 24-hour helpline center.
வணக்கம், என் பெயர் அழகு. நான் போலியோவால பாதிக்கப்பட்ட ஒரு மாற்றுத்திறனாளி. ஏற்காடுல மலை பிரதேசத்துல ஒரு குக்கிராமத்துல நான் வசிக்கிறேன். இந்த ஊரடங்கு சமயத்துல என்னால வெளியில போக முடியல. அதனால மாற்றுத்திறனாளிகள் நலத்துறை உதவி எண்ணுக்கு கால் பண்ணேன். எனக்கு தேவையான பாதுகாப்பு சாதனங்களை வீட்டுக்கே கொடுத்தாங்க. இந்த ஊரடங்கு காலத்துல எங்களால வெளியில போய் எதையும் வாங்க முடியல. அந்த டைம்ல அவங்க எங்களுக்கு வீட்டுக்கே கொடுத்தது ரொம்ப ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய உதவியா இருந்தது.
Anti-epileptic medicines for persons suffering from epilepsy and infantile seizure have been procured from UAE and Hong Kong with the help of the Ministry of External Affairs. Caregiver passes have been issued to approved private therapists to visit the home of differently abled persons for treatment.
Priya, எப்படி இருக்கீங்க? ஓகே. தலை எப்படி சொல்லுங்க. ஓகே.
இந்த ஊரடங்கு நேரத்துல எங்களால வெளியில போய் ட்ரீட்மெண்ட் எதுவும் பண்ணிக்க முடியாது. அதனால எங்களுக்கு பிசியோதெரப்பி வீட்டுக்கே எங்களுக்கு பண்றாங்க. நல்லா கை நல்லா மடக்கி விளையாட்டு முடியுது. எழுந்துச்சு நேற்று பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம்.
Physiotherapy treatments are offered at home by experts by following all the safety precautions.
எனக்கு ஒரு விபத்துல முதுகுத்தண்டை பாதிக்கப்பட்டு 2 கால்களும் செயலிழந்துருச்சு. அதுக்கப்புறம் மாற்றுத்திறனாளி இருந்து வருகிறேன். இப்போ இந்த கொரோனா பீரியட்ல முழு ஊரடங்குல எங்களால் வெளியும் போக முடியல. அந்த டைம்ல கூட சேலம் மாவட்ட மாற்றுத்திறனாளி நலத்துறை சார்பாகவும் தமிழக அரசு சார்பாகவும் முழு பாதுகாப்போட எங்களுக்கு பிசியோதெரபிஸ்ட் வீட்டுக்கே வச்சு பிசியோதெரபி ஃப்ரீயா பண்ணி கொடுத்துருக்காங்க. அதுல எங்களுக்கு அடிப்படை தேவையான யூரின் டியூப், ஜெல்லு, பேகு அது எல்லாமே 3 மாசத்துக்கு தேவையான பொருட்கள் எல்லாம் வீட்டுக்கே கொடுத்துருக்காங்க. மாற்றுத்திறனாளி நலத்துறைக்கும் தமிழக அரசும் எங்கள் நெஞ்சார்ந்த நன்றிகள்.
The Health and Family Welfare Department of Tamil Nadu provides ambulance services during this lockdown to help out the people who need urgent medical treatment. wandering, mentally challenged individuals have been rescued and provided adequate shelter and nutritious food.
மனநோயாளிகளுக்கான இல்லங்கள் ஒவ்வொரு மாவட்டத்திலும் செயல்பட்டு இருக்கு. அந்த இல்லங்களுக்கு அவர்களை ரெஸ்கியூ வேன் மூலமா அழைத்து சென்று உடல் முழுவதும் சுத்தம் செய்து அவங்கள மனநோய் மருத்துவர்களை காமிச்சு அவருடைய ஒப்பீனியனை வாங்கி அவங்களுக்கு தேவையான மருந்து மாத்திரை எல்லாம் கொடுத்து அவங்களுக்கு தேவையான உணவு உடை அனைத்தும் வழங்கி அவங்கள மகிழ்விக்கிறோம். சந்தோஷமான ஒரு சூழ்நிலை வருவதனால சில நாட்களிலே அவங்க யார் என்ன என்று கண்டறிந்து அவங்களோட நேரம் அவங்களோட வீட்டுக்கே நிறைய பேரை சேர்த்திருக்கோம், இணைச்சிருக்கோம்.
Strict health protocol has been followed at institutions, special schools, and homes for differently abled individuals. Wearing normal masks will be a hindrance to hearing and speech impaired individuals while communicating with other people. To overcome this challenge, for the first time in India, the differently abled community have come out with an innovative solution of transparent face masks that enables lip reading and facilitates seamless communication. Over 81,000 transparent face masks have been stitched and distributed to the hearing impaired persons.
தமிழ்நாடு அரசு மாற்றுத்திறனாளி துறையிலிருந்து உதடு அசைவு மறைவற்ற முகக்கவசம் கொடுத்தாங்க. அந்த மாஸ்க் போட்டவன தான் என்னுடைய பையனுக்கு வந்து நான் பேசக்கூடியதெல்லாம் நான் என்ன சொல்லணும் உடனே அந்த வாயு அசைவுல அவளுக்கு தெரியுது. இதனால எங்க குடும்பத்துல வந்து சந்தோஷம் ஏற்பட்டுள்ளது.
We can overcome any tragedy when there is teamwork, collaboration, and unity. Together, wonderful things can be achieved. Department for Welfare of the Differently Abled Persons thanks the Government of India, Honorable Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, district administrations, and various associations and organizations who helped us through this challenging time.
Thank you for that video from the state of Tamil Nadu. So now we have Mr. Johnny Tom Bagesi, who is from New Delhi. Before he joined the Indian Administration Services in 2014, he worked as the assistant collector of district of Erode in Tamil Nadu and as sub-divisional magistrate and sub-collector of the district of Kadlo. He was in charge of law and order, land issues, land reforms, and general administration of the district. He also holds an additional charge as the project director and additional director of Fisheries Department, who is involved in resolving disputes, fishing disputes between Sri Lankan and Tamil fishermen. In this capacity, he is in charge of the deep sea fishing scheme to launch newly developed fishing vessels for the fishermen of the Park Bay region. He has been in assignments to manage disasters like the Gaja cyclone and COVID-19 as part of the Disaster Management Authority of Tamil Nadu. As the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, he deals with the welfare and rights of differently abled people. Mr. Bagese, you have 10 minutes. We cannot hear you. You have to unmute.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Johnny Tom Burgess. I am an Indian Administrative Service Officer of the Government of India. I work, just a small correction, I work in Tamil Nadu. I am the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities in Tamil Nadu. I have posted the video that was played before I started speaking on the chat column so that it can be watched in a better context, because I think it was not very clear when it came on the WebEx. To start with, you would have seen the kind of activities that the government of Tamil Nadu went into during the COVID-19 period, which was a lockdown period for Tamil Nadu and the whole of India. By lockdown, there were restriction of movement, restrictions on all kinds of activities, economic activities, activities of therapy, rehabilitation and care. And it was a period of disaster, which means that most of the officers of the government went into a disaster management phase, starting the 23rd of March. In the video, as you have seen, one of the first activities that was done was to launch a helpline. And that helpline was available for differently able people, not only by voice call, but also by video call, so that sign language interpretation would be facilitated. In the 10 minutes that I've been given, I would like to cite, because I'm a field officer, an officer who is managing affairs on the field, few examples to capture your imagination on what happened on the ground. The first example is of a mother from a different state of India who was 600 kilometers away from her daughter, who was admitted to a school for special education and therapy. Now, when the lockdown was announced, all the schools sent their children back to their local guardians, and the schools were closed. The child who was with the guardian was not able to cope up with that situation, and she wanted her mother with her. She was comfortable in the school, but not at the guardian's place. So the mother called up to the helpline to say that I have to reach my child and bring her back to Bangalore, to her place, which was 600 kilometers. And there was no movement, no transportation, no passes available. Here we facilitated her with passes to travel, and we arranged transportation. The second example is that when I met a person who was wearing a mask, and I tried to communicate with that person by voice, and then I realized that he needed sign language interpretation. He was hearing impaired and also had speech effects, speech problems. Now, a mask seals your lips, and therefore it is difficult to communicate with sign language interpretation. And therefore the thought of a transparent mask arrived. And then we quickly went into the process of manufacturing transparent masks and also to distribute them to the people. Third example is of exams. 10th standard, which is matriculation board exams, were to be held, and children needed to be transported to the school so that they could write the examination. And this we had to immediately facilitate. We got calls from people regarding jobs immediately after the lockdown. They said that I need an additional 10,000 rupees to start my tender coconut vending push cart. And we had to facilitate that through the banks. We had a case of a mother calling desperately to a helpline saying that her child with epilepsy did not get the medicine because the medicine had to be imported and it couldn't be made available anymore. Therefore, we had to quickly get it procured from Dubai and Hong Kong and bring it across to India in Vande Bharat flights, which are specially operated. The point that I am trying to say is that COVID-19 lockdown was a very interesting phase for the government because there was a need for quick thinking, innovation, and flexibility, which are not words that are generally associated with a government office. Now, this was the challenge, and in the video, like you see, we were able to reach out to a large section of differently abled population in Tamil Nadu. I would like to just note a few points which came to my mind and which I would like to share with the International Mayors Forum through this webinar. One is that what we encountered during the lockdown period is the need for thinking disability, in the sense that somehow there are so many departments of the government, so many people working across the spectrum. But in the subconscious of an officer of the government, of an organization that is working during the disaster, disability has to come as a natural thought and be included in the orders that are passed, in the guidelines that are passed, in the daily working. And we all know that as per universal design, any design which is designed for a differently abled is helpful for everybody across the spectrum. So thinking disability is something that needs to be inculcated in all offices of government and also other organizations. Second is about technology. What COVID-19 did is take citizens onto the online platform, including the conference that we are having. Technology was immediately adapted and adopted by organizations. A lot of people, but India, especially Tamil Nadu, there's a lot of digital divide. You can see the stratification based on access to technology, which is a problem. Therefore, technology itself became an obstacle in reaching to people because policymakers and people who were service providers assumed in some way that everybody had access to technology. So therefore, technological divide, if we do not address it, more and more people, differently able people, may become excluded, and this has to be prevented. My third point is that one of the significant things that the government of Tamil Nadu did during this time is that it's a disaster period, and there was a need to find leaders across Tamil Nadu, across the districts. The person who will talk after me is Mr. Murali, who was a natural leader who came across and helped the differently able community during this crisis. Similarly, with respect to every disability, each category of disability, Tamil Nadu, my duty as the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities was to identify such leaders and empower them with both resources, knowledge, and also connecting them with other organizations and also government, so that everybody came together in an integrated manner. So this convergence through finding leaders in the civil society, finding leaders in the government, which was one thing that we focused on. Fourth matter is that the government should be open to suggestions and also open to taking advice from people across forums, consult with people and evolve with the disaster. If you see COVID, each day was a new experience, each day posed a new challenge. The government came to know about this challenge is through media, is through the helpline that we offered, is through consulting with different organizations so that you get to know what the issue with the differently able people are. Differently able people are not one monolithic identity, it is several identity, and each identity has a separate issue to help with. So this knowledge is acquired through consultation. Lastly, and I'll end my discussion with this, is that every disaster, every crisis poses opportunity. No disaster, no crisis should be wasted. COVID posed a difficult challenge of reaching out to differently able people across Tamil Nadu. If you see, rice was offered at the doorstep. Tamil Nadu, in an unprecedented way compared to other states, announced ₹1,000 to all differently able people to be home delivered, which means that we had to quickly find 13.35 lakhs, which is 1.3 million people across Tamil Nadu, find them in their houses and deliver this ₹1,000 to them so that they get benefited out of it. When we did that, we were able to collect the data, the geographic data, the exact position, verify where these people were. So we now have the data, a big data of where the people are, and therefore this creates an opportunity to reach out to those differently able people because we have the knowledge now. Earlier, what happened is that with every issue, the differently able people used to approach the government. What we should henceforth do with this big data is to reach out to the differently able community so that we can tailor schemes, tailor help, tailor rights, empowerment according to what the person in specific needs. So it was a big empowering moment. It was a big empowering period, and the community in Tamil Nadu, in the differently abled rights community, differently abled service providing community, rose up to the occasion. And as it is well documented in the video, we were able to, as much as possible, be flexible and adapt to the situation. So thank you very much once again for this opportunity. I thank the UN Office for Sustainable Development for this opportunity in Tamil Nadu to share the experience. And I hope we can continue to be part of this discussion and also provide suggestions based on our experience as a differently abled welfare department of Tamil Nadu. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny, for those interesting remarks. And I think you did highlight the importance of, we need to think disability. So how do we naturally have that in our systems so that at least, we can, from the get-go, think of including everyone in whatever we do. And I think the response that you also undertook in response to the disaster was to make sure that it's just not a missed opportunity. You could also collect important critical data that you could then use to empower communities and provide translate and other issues. Our last speaker on my list is Mr. Murali Padmanabhan. Mr. Padmanabhan, you have 10 minutes. You're muted. You're still muted. Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good morning and good evening to everyone. My sincere thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and my humble thanks to all the speakers who delivered their interventions before and facilitated my job more simpler. And moving on to the slides, I have a few slides to share and sum up what the others have already highlighted. Looking at the background, it's the matter of diversity, how diversity is encountered by different attributes, which are known, in our case, the barriers which can be resulting out of the human tendency. It could be arising out of the environment. It could be sometimes by virtue of the outcome or the effects of policies and provisions that make a life of people, particularly people with the disabilities, in a difficult situation. We witness that in many countries, many cities, how disability and people with the disabilities, because of the identity, because of the barriers, the layers of marginalization in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of their ethnicity or the geographical location, or including the socioeconomic status, they have accentuated the vulnerability, increased the disproportionate effect of the COVID effect. That's what we were talking about. More than the infection itself, the impact has taken the toll on people with the disabilities. Moving on to the next slide, why there is a urgency here. What is there for people with the disabilities? Looking at the population, as Daniela said, it's a matter of 15% of the world population, or the 1 billion plus people like me who have migrated to cities in search of employment, in search of new opportunities, in search of education or health requirements. So it is also adding to the pressure and the overload the cities are already encountering. And in the future, down the line, we are going to have much more challenges because of the increase in the population, including people with disabilities. So coming to the impact, moving on to the next slide, I would see the impact of COVID in three ways. There are issues which are exacerbated, which are pre-existing challenges. There are challenges which are created due to this new normal. There are opportunities, of course, the transition or the transformation that by virtue of COVID, the new normal, the flip side of it, the positive side of it. What is happening? Moving on to the next slide. What is exacerbated? People who are already using some of the services in the beginning as it was something new to us. When it comes to this pandemic, people with the disabilities had lots of challenges in accessing their daily living requirements. So that was in fact deteriorating. People got frustrated. So that is one thing in terms of medical services, in terms of basic sanitation facilities. Even there was an increase in the violence perpetrated against people with disabilities. What was new? What was something which became new? The regular things like the therapy services could not be availed because we have to take the maximum load of COVID-related clients in the service centers, and some of the regular institutions which were supposed to provide the services for people with disabilities were closed for regular services. In terms of educational institutions, when it comes to livelihoods, when it comes to other regular interventional services, they have been completely closed. They created more challenges. I'm happy that the city of Chennai and Tamil Nadu were quick to respond to those kind of basic things so that people with disabilities are not disproportionately affected. Hats off to Tamil Nadu for the timely and very proactive and sensitive intervention here. Then the third point, as I was mentioning, the transformation as a new normal, there are opportunities coming up. Somebody who was finding it difficult to find a job, they were able to do something by taking advantage of the digital revolution. Of course, that doesn't end up in organizations or authorities citing it as an excuse to deny accessibility. So this could not be as a kind of ramification because of the new normal. Again, another opportunity could be children who could really access education through online. However, when we are promoting online education, the consideration has to be given for accessibility. How accessible the platforms. Though I could learn about 10 platforms in the past 7 months, some of them have some areas for improvement, so that we can realize the principle of leaving no one behind. Because universities, schools, everyone is moving towards the digital platform, and it is necessary that children and youth with the disabilities do not get left out in the education and impacting the realization of the sustainable goals. And looking at the relevance, the next slide, almost every SDG is relevant to people with the disabilities, and the COVID has really made a sort of negative impact on whatever smaller way of progress we have made in including people with the disabilities has received some setbacks. Moving on to the next slide, looking at the cities, which is around the goal 11, how we can ensure the cities become more responsive, more inclusive, more accessible to people with disabilities. How the cities can look at the barriers, how the metros, how the railway infrastructure, how the public transport, how the public utility buildings, the shopping malls, the commercial establishments, how we can look at those things in compliance with the different articles of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. I again convey my great appreciation to Chennai for the wonderful work they have done. Moving on to my slides on recommendations and move forward. What can be done? Look at our public transport. As the commissioner was mentioning about every disaster comes with opportunity. Let's take this as an opportunity to ensure that our public transport become more accessible, our health services become more sensitive, our policies become more innovative. Then looking at some of the institutional things, education or livelihood, how we can look at inclusion of people with disabilities in the new normal, and how the opportunities created or arising out of COVID is definitely a kind of boom in the lives of people with disabilities. Moving on to my last slide. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and look forward to better cities and better inclusive life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morali. I think now we have come to the end of our list of presentations. So I think we have a few questions that were posted in our chat box. So these are addressed to all the participants. So let's maybe just, I think I can see only two of them. One is from Mr. Moni Petit to all panelists. And the question is, do those with learning disabilities get meaningfully paid jobs too? And the second question we have is from Mr. Fekadu Kebede. Again, it's all to all panelists. Since the birth of the United Nations, the issue of persons with disability has been on the table. But the issue of this marginalized group has not been resolved so far. And like all other social groups, the issues of disability do not move even one step. Basically, what are the reasons for this? And what can be done to promote the UNCRPD and all the other internationally agreed agendas on persons with disabilities? So you have about 2 minutes each if you want to respond to those two questions. So anyone can respond, maybe Mr. Murali or Johnny or whoever is there who wants to respond. I know Miss Daniela Bass has another meeting, so she left us. So maybe she was probably not in a position to respond on behalf of the Division for Inclusive Social Development. But any other panelists who wants to respond? Ms. Morali?
Can you come back with the question? I was lost a bit.
Oh, okay. So there are two questions. The first question is, do those with learning disabilities get meaningfully paid jobs as well? And the second question is, the issue of persons with disabilities has been on the agenda of the United Nations for a while now. Why do we have limited progress, in your view?
Well, thank you for that question. When it comes to the second question, it's a right step at the right time. We have the advantage of the convention in place, and which is about 13 years old. And again, looking at the diversity, looking at the other considerations, most of the time, disability doesn't get the necessary and adequate priorities. Disability, the perspective itself, is something to be reflected upon. How we look at disability. Are we looking at persons with a disability as part of human diversity, or something which is a sort of a liability? Are we looking at persons with a disability from a very productive point of view? So these are some of the questions which are cropping up, and it's again institutionalizing the perspective. There are individuals who are passionate. At the same time, institutional support will help us to make more progress. I could see a lot of changes, a lot of progress during this COVID. Every government, every organization, every institution, right from UN to a local body, they came out with the guideline. They issued guidelines. Ministry have come out with specific guidelines, recommendations, how to engage with people with a disability and how to include them. So this is one thing I could see in the right direction. And of course, it's a long road, a long way to go. Thank you.
Only to add to what Murali Padmanabhan contributed. I'd like to say that when it comes to jobs for learning disability or other categories of disabilities, it is important, again, going back to what I was saying, which is thinking disability. In the industrial policy that we have, we are now arguing for the need to add jobs for differently abled as a section, so that based on jobs there can be incentives provided for industries to invest, a specific company to invest in Tamil Nadu. I'm talking in the context of Tamil Nadu. We are sending notices to all departments and also private firms. We started with private firms on sensitizing them on how differently able are productive individuals who can contribute to the progress of the company. Everybody, even every person, if you see, they learn on the job. So this idea that learning on the job is common for every individual has to be registered in the mind of any human resource employer. So I think the way forward is to actively participate in the working of every department, every company as much as possible, so that this can be changed. And it has to, therefore, the idea of thinking disability has to be registered in each and every policymaker and also job giver. It's a slow process. The movement of disability is new in the sense that it's been active for a long years, but when you see in the context of development of a department as such, especially in Tamil Nadu, it is taking time, but it's going, like Murli has mentioned, the evolution is very evident, that we are evolving, the movement is evolving, the strength of the department is evolving, the recognition of the rights is evolving. So I see that we're going on a positive trend, and it has to be continued.
Thank you. I have one additional question from Rizalio. Basically, it's for you, Johnny, and Mr. Morali. Why is it that the differently abled is used to label with persons with disabilities in Tamil Nadu? Yeah, Mr. Morali or Johnny, you can.
Maybe Mr. Varghese.
Could you repeat the question? I missed that part where the question came.
Why is it that the differently abled is used to label persons with disabilities in Tamil Nadu? Okay. The traditionally agreed concept is persons with disabilities.
So differently abled it's actually a term, I think, which the rights community fought for, and it was changed by the government. It's mostly, it comes out of the term came from a Tamil, the Tamil translation of it is, which is Matru Tirunali, that they have that the people with different abilities. So that concept, it was felt that it is better than the word persons with disabilities. However, there are different schools of thought. There are objections registered to this term being used as well. And I think it is not with the term that is being used, but it's about real empowerment. So I'm sure that there are different schools of thought, different objections, different ideas regarding the term used, especially in Tamil Nadu, because it has been changed to differently abled. Whereas in the Act that we have, it is persons with disabilities. So some would like to be accepted. The word has to be accepted. For the others, they have to be. It is seen in a different light. So it was a political question at the end of the day, and the government decided to term the department that way. Thank you.
Thank you. And one last question I have is, this is, I think, from maybe a student from the Caribbean. It applies to students and teachers. Are there any online systems to assist teachers and students? Also, are there any software programs that can translate words into a sign language display for hearing impaired persons and students alike? Basically, it's all about access to technology, closing the digital divide. And one panelist can also, provide responses to that one. Ms. Morali, are you aware of any technologies that you have been using, whether sign language or that can help students?
Well, at the moment, we use the international sign language in all the conferences. That is one thing, and the closed captioning. Other than that, in country, we have some video calling facility, customized because of the different, sign language practices in each country, each dialect, I would say. So it's all customized one. And there are facilities available in the cities, video calling and interpretation, messaging, texting. Yes, it is available. It has to be standardized.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question I have is from Sandra. She's a student who is studying a bachelor's degree in architecture, and she's currently focusing on creating space for all and not leaving anybody behind. So she would like to know the view of the panelists on how architecture has affected the differently able or persons with disabilities.
Well, thank you for that question, Sandra. As a person with a disability, yes, infrastructure is a crucial thing. If you look at the barriers, accessibility, particularly the physical access, is something which can make changes, which can bring in progress in lives of people with the disabilities. I have friends, colleagues who could not continue their employment just because of poor infrastructure, inaccessible infrastructure. Simple but very proactive steps in adapting the infrastructure would make a lot of sense, a lot of differences in the lives of people with the disabilities. Students like you, this is where we are trying to advocate with the organization, educational institutions rather, to look at accessibility as part of the curriculum. Youngsters like you have come forward out of your interest, whereas this interest should be converted into institutional policies. The curriculum should also have mechanisms to sensitize, teach students about accessibility, which should become a precondition and should be added to the accreditation process. That's where you can see the universal design becoming true. Thank you. Thank you once again for that question.
And this one, I cannot resist asking this question. I think I'll make it the last one, given our time constraints. Again, to all panelists, what are the effective ways in which we can ensure the safety of persons with disabilities on cyberspace? Anyone to take that one on? Issues of cyberbullying. How do we make sure that we protect persons with disabilities when it comes to cyberbullying?
Well, as a person using websites and platforms of late in a bigger way, as a visually impaired, I can share that yes, security is important. As long as you ensure the accessible environment when it comes to digital platforms and a bit of basic orientation about the security with accessible features, I think that should take care. And of course, the digital education is also paramount, equally important for people with the disabilities, because one should not take people with a disability for granted when it comes to cyber security. And the cyber security should also be made inclusive. And we should be exposed to the pros and cons of the cyber security. Importantly, it should be customized and well planned to suit the need of everybody, including people with the disabilities. Of course, there are categories, different types of impairments. We need to take into account this complex structure. Thank you. That's my simple answer to this.
Regarding cyberbullying, any kind of bullying cannot be tolerated. Therefore, I think that is a basic aspect of lawlessness. In Tamil Nadu, there are forums. A case registered in the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities office will definitely take it to the notice of the police authorities if they are not taking it up themselves. Therefore, in cases of bullying, with respect to cyberbullying, should be noted, and to call it out would be the right way to go about. And you can seek the help and the assistance of the law and order mechanism. In India, the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities are empowered under the law to take the task to the law and order mechanism, to the criminal justice system, and seek accountability. So to approach these systems and to seek these mechanisms is a knowledge that has to be passed on to students, especially in schools.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.
I think we have now reached the end of our meeting, but before I summarize the key messages, I would like to inform all the participants that all the materials for this webinar are available through the UNOSD website. So you can go to unosd.un.org/content/webinar. You'll be able to access all the materials from today. But in terms of, I think, the key messages, what we have had today, I think we have had a fantastic group of panelists, and I'd like to thank all of you for your wonderful presentations. And I think what we had was that COVID-19 is deepening pre-existing inequalities. And some of these inequalities, they've been there because of fragile context, issues of neglect and abuse and marginalization, issues of lack of adequate access to basic services and livelihoods. These issues were worsened when, all these services were closed because of COVID. And of course, the new normal that emerged created new barriers for many people with disabilities, although it might have lifted some existing barriers for other groups. So the issue is, how do we build that better in a post-pandemic environment? I think one key resounding message is that we need to put persons with disabilities at the center of all our efforts, as well as families. Families should be part of the story of rebuilding back better, and we should make services affordable, in particular closing the digital divide and investing in better data and research. It is also important for us to change mindset and laws to ensure that the rights and protections of persons with disabilities are guaranteed. And of course, our responsibilities to persons with disabilities should not stop when we are addressing an emergency. When an emergency comes and passes, we should have post-emergency response measures and plans of action to effectively address some of our long existing challenges. It is also very important to listen to the communities that have been affected. In this particular, the voice and inputs of persons with disabilities matter. So in a way, we need to add chairs to the table so that those chairs can, accommodate all stakeholders in any policy decisions that we take. And I think implementing the CRPD and the 2030 Agenda, as well as adopting the UN disability strategies, can bring lasting change in our communities. And of course, it was also underscored that it's important for us to monitor closely the implementation of SDG 11, in particular, the need to invest in sustainable urbanization. The issue of social protection, I think, came out clearly. In the case of the state of Tamil Nadu, you managed to provide cash transfers, but these cash transfers should be part of a universal social system. I think if you do that, it also enables any transitions into the workforce for persons with disabilities to be adequately taken into account. The importance of public-private partnerships is an important issue, especially there are groups that are out there who are in the private sector or civil society organizations that help with these transitions into employment. Another important element is that we need to think of disability each time when government officials are addressing issues. Disability issues should not come, they should be natural. You should always think about it when you are coming up with any government response to a particular situation. And of course, the issue of technology. Use of online platforms has been a great way to respond to the lockdowns, but definitely we need to tackle the digital divide that has also emerged, in particular when it comes to access to education and healthcare. And of course, disasters are an important issue, whether they're man-made or natural-made. And these disasters also provide opportunities for us to find local leaders who can be very effective in leading local communities in these response measures that we take. We need to identify these local leaders and to empower them with adequate resources. And of course, governments also need to be open to suggestions that come from these various groups, as well as to every member of society. And I think we need to take advantage of big data. Disasters also give us an opportunity to collect more accurate data on who are the impacted communities. And that way we are better able to target our response measures, as well as to come up with better policies. And lastly, in order to make our cities more inclusive, we need to look at infrastructure, public transport, buildings, to make sure that they're in compliance with the CRPD measures, as well as ensuring that we have policies that are innovative and that promote inclusion of persons with disabilities in a new normal. With those remarks, I thank all our panelists. I don't know whether my colleagues in Incheon City, Jean Daragon, has any remarks to make.
Thank you very much. Actually, I just want to thank you, Anson. I would like to thank I don't want to take too much time, so I want to thank all the speakers, and also want to thank you, Anson, for moderating this session of the last preparatory webinar for our International Mayor Forum. I'd like to also thank all the participants and all the UNOSD and the ISD staff who support the organization of this webinar. I would like also to invite you all to the International Mayor Forum that will be the week of the 16th of November. And as our head of office, Mr. Chong-Kyu Park, mentioned in his opening, so we will have this webinar. Please look at the UNOSD.un.org, and we'll find more information about the forthcoming International Mayor's Forum. Thank you all, and then I'll leave it. I'll give the mic to you, back to you. And just want to say thank you for this great webinar. All the speakers, it was very interesting. Every time I'm learning a lot. And I think from the comments I see, a lot of people also enjoyed this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I also would like to thank all those people who posed questions, including Abiram, who asked the last question on cyberspace and cyber security and bullying issues for persons with disabilities. So thanks to everyone. This has been a wonderful webinar series, and we look forward to engaging with you again in our future webinar series. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day.